Well, as I wonder and reflect and prepare for each Sunday, I often find myself wondering what experiences we might be holding in common. And this week, I know at least one thing that happened to all of us in some way or another. Surprised? We all got a census form to fill out. Now, it might have been the short form, and for some of us, the long form. And maybe you filled it out, or maybe someone else in the home where you live. But hopefully by now, you have been recorded on some Canadian census form. And the government collects this data for lots of important reasons and for programs and information, but one of the things I have been thinking about is that it reminds us of the ways that we are connected to one another, of just one of the things that we all hold in common. Now, not everybody is happy about being connected in this way. A bit to the west of us, there appears to be a separatist movement going on, although it is perhaps a more complicated movement than you might have assumed if you thought that there were simply frustrated Alberta residents wondering whether they might be better off on their own instead of being part of Canada. And I say that because of the news investigating this week that discovered that much of the support for the division has actually come from Russia and the United States, rather than the people of Alberta. And so it has me thinking about who we choose to be connected with, and why we might choose to be connected or disconnected. If the movement for separation in Alberta is successful, would it make them more independent? Or would it simply just change their lines of connection? After all, real self-sufficiency is impossible. Regardless of what happens with Alberta, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. Just think about how much difficulty places have even determining whether they're going to observe daylight savings time or not. You can't make that decision without understanding it impacts how you relate to other places. Saskatchewan will tell you it is possible. Are there consequences? Yes, there are. And there are compensations to be made in order to maintain good connections with the people in the different time zones. But you can't just do it, right? Margaret Wheatley argues that for as long as we've been around as humans, as wandering bands of nomads or cave dwellers, we have sat together and shared experiences together. We've painted images on rock walls, recounted dreams and visions, told stories of the day, and generally felt comforted to be in the world together. And when the world became fearsome, we came together. When the world called us to explore its edges, we journeyed together. Whatever we did together. We have never wanted to be alone. I think that's what we see in Jesus' words as he tried to figure out how to say goodbye to them. Today's scripture reading picks up where last week's reading left off. Jesus didn't stop speaking, but we stopped listening. So this week, we pick it up again, and as we listen again, we might remember that he has been comforting his friends with reminders that they will know what to do, and they'll know how to do it, even if he's not physically there to tell them so. And then he doubles down on this message in the part we heard today, saying, not only will you have the memory of what we've done together to help you along, but God's actually going to send a spirit to be with you in real time. You will not be left alone. I wonder, when you hear that, whether it feels like a truly comforting message, and whether that feels like a comforting message to us these days. After kind of getting comfortable with the habits of a pandemic lockdown, more and more of us created habits where we thought we were just fine if we were left alone, thank you very much. We're quite used to just looking after ourselves. We're more fragmented and isolated from one another than ever, really. Now, it is possible to make real connections online. Technologies like FaceTime and Zoom and dating apps even some forms of social media have allowed us to connect with people across the country and around the globe. But those same technologies allow us to be content with a kind of false imitation of real connection, where we're simply observers of one another. We watch television or YouTube videos or other people's posts, but they don't have to know that we're lurking there. They learn nothing about us, and we learn about them only certain versions of them, the one that they have decided to share with this public audience. So it remains sort of a fairly surface connection, doesn't it? And when your life comes kind of crashing down around you, will these be the people who jump up to help? Will you even tell them? These days, we're likely to seek consolation in everything except each other. The entire world seems rather hypnotized in different directions, encouraging us to love things rather than people, to embrace everything new without noticing what's lost or wrong, to choose fear over peace. We promise each other everything except each other. We don't have time. We don't take time to connect. That takes a lot of time. Who's got that? The Archbishop Desmond Tutu described it as a radical brokenness in all of our existence. That's cheery. What Jesus seems to think that his followers need is something he calls a spirit of truth that will accompany them and keep them connected. I think this spirit is how we describe whatever ways Jesus walks beside us in this life, into our places of fear and discomfort and uncertainty and troubled hearts. And it's hard to describe that spirit in a way that makes sense to us. The church has tried for centuries, and rarely do our explanations seem satisfactory, do they? One of the ancient Christian teachers talked about the relationship this way. They said, imagine, for example, that God is the sun, the source of all light and life. Then Jesus would be the beam of that light streaming toward the earth. And the Spirit is the point of light that actually arrives, that touches the earth with warmth and energy. The Spirit is the point where God gets there, where God is present and active in our lives, in our world. Does that fit with you? Perhaps you've known this Spirit's presence in your own life. Maybe you too felt the warmth of God within you, or the comforting assurance that you were not alone. I can think of an experience like that. Can you? There was a time I was a theological student in university, and my advisor was a professor that I appreciated and respected very much. And a close friend of his died suddenly, tragically. It was awful. And he was asked to preside at the funeral. And that friend also happened to have a prominent role in the United Church of Canada. So a couple of friends of mine were of this pastor. And I decided that we would go to the funeral just to support a professor in his role. And all church theological students, we'd be there to just kind of be there. Part of that connecting to show support. And it was in this extremely large church in Toronto. And there was a very large congregation of very sad people. And so we sat and we listened to people talk about tragedy in that moment, me and my friends, and they talked about their deep sadness. And we heard stories of lessons learned and gifts shared, and we sang about grief and we sang about hope. And then, sitting in the pew, I kind of felt this deep connection to these followers of Jesus in this united church of ours. And that would have been enough, I think, to feel the Spirit being present. But then came this mystical moment, if you will. We were singing the hymn, which is called "We Have This Ministry." And if you know the hymn, you know the words go, "And we are not discouraged," which is quite the thing to be singing at a funeral. And as we sang, "And we are not discouraged," this beam of sunlight kind of shone through these giant stained glass windows and bathed the whole place in light. And I looked around and locked eyes with the friends I'd come with. And we knew in a very deep way that we were not alone. And it wasn't just the light. It was that look of knowing between the people who knew each other well. It was the combined voices singing of their hope in the midst of a difficult time, as well as that recognition that came with that stream of light that suggested to me that God had somehow arrived. And then it was done. But I won't forget it. Perhaps you've had an experience like that. Or perhaps you never have. And if so, don't worry. You stand in good company. If you cannot name a time or a place or an experience of the Spirit like that, it doesn't mean the Spirit has passed you by. Dr. Joseph Sittler was a pastor for many years, and he also taught theology at the University of Chicago. And Dr. Sittler longed for an experience of the Spirit's presence in his own life, but that mystical thing never came. In one of his sermons, he said, "It is only honest to say that I have never known fully that kind of life within times to declare what one does not know. In obedience to the bigness of God's story, which transcends personal apprehension, one may do this." Joseph Sittler trusted that God was present, even if he couldn't name one particular experience of assurance. The Spirit touched him, though, in the words of Scripture, in the hymns, in the liturgy, and in his connection with other believers. He knew he was not an orphan. And we are not left on our own to imagine this Spirit. You and I have gospel stories of Jesus showing us where the Spirit was blowing, hinting at where the Spirit might move into the future. When people talk about their own experience of the Spirit without using our language, it might be God's wind is also blowing in their lives. You know, there was this a viral moment from about a week ago that took place in Buffalo, New York. It was April 28th. The Buffalo Sabres were taking on the Boston Bruins. It was Game 5 in the first round of the playoffs. The Sabres had not been to the second round in 19 years. And they won. Or no, I think maybe, I don't know if they won. It doesn't matter because it wasn't the hockey that went viral. They did make it to the second round, though. You probably know that. One of the traditions in Buffalo is that both the American and the Canadian anthems are sung at all the hockey games, regardless of whether or not a Canadian team is playing. And only seconds into "O Canada," the singer's microphone malfunctioned. And a crowd of 19,000 almost entirely American fans filled in the gap by singing it for her. A very strange moment of unity, vastly different than what we're used to hearing these days about the connection between the United States and Canada. A contrast to where I started, speaking about that separatist movement in Alberta and the United States having interests there. Was a movement of the spirit of truth in that hockey arena that made its way through the internet, where everybody saw all these Americans singing "O Canada" at the top of their lungs? I don't know. It was certainly a moment of connection and a moment of shared humanity than the prevailing and popular opinion for division. A reminder that we're not alone. And maybe it was as powerful as it was because it wasn't what people expected. Something that is hard to believe could happen without the Spirit. Leonardo Boff is a Roman Catholic priest who spent much of his life working among the poorest people in South America. And he says, the Spirit is that little flicker of fire burning at the bottom of the woodpile. More rubbish is piled on, rain puts out the flame, wind blows the smoke away, but underneath everything, an ember burns on, unquenchable. The Spirit sustains the feeble breath of life in an empire of death. Is that what happened in that hockey arena? I don't know. I will not leave you orphaned, said Jesus. I will come to you. And whether or not we realize how much we need it, this promise remains for you and for me. For truly abundant life understands our dependence on other people, on the environment, on our spiritual connections to God. Abundant living reaches out beyond ourselves and discovers that when we offer ourselves to the world, we get so much more in return. So when we fill out those census forms, I hope it reminds us that we are part of something bigger than ourselves. And when it seems that the rubbish and the rain have destroyed the spark of faith within you, may the wind of the Spirit blow those drying embers to life again and again and again and again. In the United Church tradition, we have a statement of faith that begins and ends, we are not alone. Nope. We are not alone. Thanks be to God.